We are continuing on the series called The Walk, which is based on a text from Reverend Adam Hamilton, who's a United Methodist pastor in the Kansas City area. And it's 5 essential practices for Christian living. And so far we've talked about worship and prayer and studying. And today we're talking about serving. And it made me reflect on just something that I experienced both in my personal life and in my professional life that causes me to reflect a lot. But I see varying levels of well-being of people. I spend time with people who are toward the end of life and toward people who are loving on people who are in the end of life. And it lets me see the positive side of that, which is a bunch of selfless people who are willing to serve them, whether it's a spouse who doesn't really have a medical title, but it's also the doctors and the nurses and the PAs and the CNAs and all the people that do such incredible things that I just can't wrap my mind around the mental fortitude that it takes to be in those professions that deal with that on a day in and day out basis, just how unbelievably strong that they are and how thankful we should be before them all the time. But it often makes me reflect on my own mortality. At 31 years old, it often feels like it's way down the road, and yet experiencing this on a fairly regular basis often makes me think about myself and how I'm living and how I can get to the end of life without any kinds of regrets and avoiding getting to that stage of life where I can no longer do things that I wish I could have done, and I can't take back what's been, and I can't go back and redo the things that I wish that I would have done. And I think at a first glance, when we think about this, trying to live with no regrets can make us live with reckless abandon, I think, which can make us have just as many or more regrets than we would have if we lived differently. And so I don't think that's necessarily the solution. But what's interesting is from a book from a lady named Bronnie Ware, who is an Australian palliative care expert. She spent decades in that industry. She decided to write a book about her experiences with people who are going to the end of their life. And what she found and why she felt inspired to write the book is because she found just consistently hearing the regrets of people who were facing the end of life. And so her book is called The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. And she lists what she would say is the undisputed top 5 list of regrets of those who are on their deathbed. Here's what they say. I wish I had the courage to live a life true to myself and not the life that others expected of me. I wish I hadn't worked so hard or so much. I wish I had the courage to express my feelings. I wish I'd stayed in touch with my friends. And I wish I'd let myself be happier. I know that I noticed something when I read this. Do you notice anything about them? They are all in action. They were all regrets based on something I didn't do. And so often we're so concerned about regretting the things that we do, and instead of facing the truth that maybe the things that we end up regretting the most are the things that we don't do. The majority of these regrets are things left undone. And psychologically speaking, psychologists actually tell us we deal better with what's known, even if we regret it, than the regrets that are left unknown. Because we wonder what could have been. At least we can wrap our minds around what has been, but it's the things of what could have been that make us struggle even more. Even in the midst of our grief, when we lose somebody, often our grief is based on what could have been or what should have been, not just about what did happen. And so the unfortunate reality is that regret is part of life. None of us will ever experience anything. Even if we say no regrets, I think we're trying to take on that mantra more than we actually live it out. I hope you have some regret because it recognizes that we are fallible humans who can make mistakes. So regret is going to be a part of life, and we can't always control that, but I think we can take wisdom from people like Bronnie Ware, who's sharing 5 regrets, and we can live differently in response to that. And so I kind of thought, okay, well, if these are the regrets of people who are on their deathbed, then what do we need to do about it? I mean, how can we be our truest self, and how can we live this best life, and how can we do what we want to do? And so what I found is a study from the University of California, a psychology professor there in Berkeley, conducted a study and deducted these 7 things that the happiest people on earth regularly do. Ready? Here's this list of these 7 things. So this is the flip side of those regrets. They prioritize their family and friends. They express gratitude. They regularly serve others in big and small ways. They practice optimism about the future. They savor life's pleasures by living in the moment. They make physical exercise a weekly or daily habit, and they are committed to a lifelong and typically virtuous ambition. You notice something about these. The vast majority of both of these regrets and these actions are relationship-based. They are based in relationship. That is what all of these are all about. To say, I wish I had courage to be my true self is so that I can have true and real and deep and meaningful relationships. I wish I hadn't worked so hard isn't about the regret of just working. It's about what I could have done, which is prioritize something more important than that. I wish I'd had the courage to express my true feelings. What is that about? Having real relationships. I wish I'd stayed in touch with my friends' relationships. In the things the happiest people do, prioritize family and friends. They regularly serve others in big and small ways. You see the point. A recurring theme of our top regrets are when we let go of relationships and don't prioritize them. And the things that make us happiest are when we prioritize relationships. So if we can take a peek into the future and say something to our future selves from our past selves, it would be yourself and serve others. If we can summarize this list of 12 items to make us more content in our life, it would be to be our true selves and serve others. Because the truth of this is that putting others first leaves no regrets after. Putting others first leaves no regrets after. But if you're anything like me, you feel the tension in your life between pursuing things that you desire for yourself while also sacrificing for others. We feel the need to help others and to serve others and to sacrifice for others, and yet also want things for ourselves. And in a world that tells us we ought to pursue the things for ourselves, how do we balance the need and desire to serve others and the virtuous reality that is, but then also want things for ourselves and do things for ourselves and have ambition? Well, when it comes to this, I would say we are all going to have different strong points and different weak points when it comes to serving others. Let me tell you what I mean. What might be easier for you might be harder for somebody else. So maybe for you, it's easy to work hard and be generous with the money that you earn, but it's harder to prioritize relationships. For others, it may be easier to prioritize relationships, but harder to be generous. Maybe it's easy for you to serve your family, but harder for you to serve people outside of your family. Maybe it's easy for you to put others first if you respect them or if you know them, but if not, then it's harder for you to put others first. Maybe you're in a season in your life where your schedule is so packed full of things for yourself and for your family that there isn't any room left over for others, or at least it doesn't feel like it. But the truth is that we are creatures created in the image of a God who is self-sacrificial innately, who is relationship-oriented innately. This is a triune God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, defined by relationship, who sent the Son, Jesus, to earth to be with us in relationship and to serve us. And so it's interesting that we think so often that if we prioritize ourselves, then that's where we're going to find contentment, and yet psychology and human history and experience and hearing these stories of the regrets of others proves to us that that's just wrong, and yet we often pursue that anyway, even if we don't know or we don't think that we are. But it's not just psychology, and it's not just human history, and it's not just human story, but it's actually a theme throughout our scriptures. That we regret it when we don't prioritize others. We regret it when we don't live a life of self-sacrifice. Following God's people in the Bible throughout the history of Scripture shows us the rhythm of what happens. People turn away from God, and God reorients them and stays with them and says, stay with me, you're going to like this, I promise. And they say, okay, God, we're with you. And then inevitably they go their own way and they do what they think is best for them. And this happens over and over and over and over again. And then ultimately in the Old Testament, we end up in a place at the end of the book of Judges where it says that there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And this left them in ruin. And after that, we see a chasm between that story and when Jesus arrives on the scene. People in desperate need for new direction, desperate need of hope. How did they land there? Because everyone did what was right in their own eyes. Everyone was self-seeking and self-oriented. But God never gives up on people. God has never done that throughout the history of Scripture, time and time again. God is raising up new leaders, and God is speaking to people, and God is serving others, and God is saying, I am with you till the end. I will never give up on you, and I will never forsake you. God is constantly raising up people. This is the way God does things. If God says, I'm not giving up on you, he doesn't just say emotionally or spiritually. He says, I'm going to raise up people to lead you and to be with you, for me, on my behalf, and with me. And one such person in the Old Testament is the prophet Isaiah. Isaiah lived in the 8th century before Jesus. And Isaiah, some people say he was rich, some people say he was poor, some people say he wasn't important, some people say he was very important. We don't really know. This is the history of much of the specifics of the Old Testament. What we do know is that Isaiah was a faithful follower of God. He was a faithful Jew who is probably much like the life that you're living today as a faithful follower of God. But something happened to Isaiah one day. And Isaiah has this vision, a very unique vision, a dream, if you like to think of it that way, where God speaks directly to Isaiah. And what does God say to Isaiah? God gives Isaiah the state of humanity. And he says, Isaiah, my people are suffering, my people are hurting, and they need help, and they need hope. Their hearts had become hardened toward one another and toward God himself, and instead of serving and honoring one another and helping one another, they were too concerned about themselves. Once again, we are in the same rhythm, and now here God is raising up a new leader. But God won't leave people on their own. God will act, and God acts through people. God acts through us. And here's what's happening with Isaiah. Today we have just one verse that we're focusing on for our passage today. It comes from Isaiah 6:8. So in response to this vision, this calling from God, here's what happens. God says, "Whom shall I send, and who will go for us?" And Isaiah responded, "Here am I, send me." From here, Isaiah spoke regularly to the people of Jerusalem and the people of Israel about the dangers of the path that they were headed down and how people were suffering, and something needed to be done about it individually and collectively. But here's the thing about Isaiah. When Isaiah says, "Here I am, send me," and God says, "My people are suffering," he didn't just ask Isaiah to preach about it. He didn't just ask Isaiah to prophesy about it. He asked Isaiah to go and do something about it. So when we hear Isaiah writing these things and warning people about the direction that they're headed, encouraging people to serve others and prioritize those in need, Isaiah isn't saying it from his ivory tower. He's not putting it on his social media account saying, "Boy, people really ought to do something about this. I feel so passionately about this issue, I'm going to speak out on it publicly," and that's the end of it. You see, Isaiah ended up in the trenches. He became one with the very people that he was asking others to serve. He knew their needs and their lives so intricately and so intimately that he lived that life with them. So when he says, "Here am I, Lord, send me," he didn't just say, "Send me to say something." He said, "Send me there with them. If your people are suffering, I want to be with them." Does this sound familiar? This is the ministry and the story of Jesus. Isaiah is a reflection of God himself, who says, if you are hurting and you are suffering and you are grieving, my words don't mean much. Allow me to take action and be with you in the middle of it all. Be elbow to elbow with the people who I'm saying we need to serve and we need to help. His entire life was devoted to serving others and fighting against individuals and systems that perpetuated such harm. But this is nothing new of God's people. All throughout the Old Testament, this is happening over and over and over again. God tells Moses, "My people are in danger and they need help." God tells Joshua, "My people need a home and they need hope," and Joshua does something. God tells Esther, you are in a situation to help my people, and I need you to take advantage of it. God tells Peter, Jesus himself tells Peter, somebody needs to take this message and this movement and move it into the future. And Peter responds. God tells Paul, this message needs to go to the ends of the earth and reach people in places it's never been before. And Paul responds. Over and over again, God is raising up people and encouraging people to go and to be sent. He says, my people are suffering, and the response of God's people to that is, here I am, Lord. Send me. Time and time again, God has done this. God has raised up people, and people have responded because of the love that they know from God. The problem is, as often as this has been the response of God's people, this has not been the response often enough. Because as different as we may think about the world of Isaiah's day, thousands of years ago, centuries before Christ arrived on the scene, it would be unrecognizable to us based on the world today. But what would not be unrecognizable is the fact that people were in need. People were hurting. People were suffering. And people were grieving. That's one thing that's still true today. Take just Missouri, for example. Over 900,000 people in the state of Missouri are currently living with food insecurity. That means around 1 in 5 kids stand a chance of going to bed hungry each and every day in Missouri. Our demographics here in Centralia show us that around 1 in 10 families in Centralia live below the poverty line, and over 40% of those households are led by single moms. 1 in 5 people in Columbia live in poverty. It's estimated that at least a quarter of Missouri residents have skipped or ignored needed or recommended medical treatment in the last year because of inability to afford it. Around 40% of Missouri residents have experienced financial hardships in the last year because of medical expenses. These are not just statistics. These are people that you know, and these are people that you rub elbows with, and these are people that you spend time with, and this may even be you. We understand that it's difficult. These are hardworking people who are better. The world is better because these people are in it. They are hurting and they are suffering, and it is difficult. And they've ended up in this situation not just because we have powerful people and systems that are corrupted that bring about such discrepancy, but it's also, and even more so, because way more people have decided to do absolutely nothing about it. Because when faced with terrible sadness and terrible difficulty and struggling people and the call of God, it's much easier to stay comfortable. So when faced with these numbers, when faced with such suffering and hurt and pain all around us, and God says to us, just like always, my people are suffering, my people need help, what will our response be? Will our response be, okay, well, I'm just going to keep doing exactly what I've been doing? Because that's left us exactly in the situation that we're in, where people are suffering and where people are hurting. If we change nothing, we will get the results we have always gotten. See, we might not get a vision like Isaiah. You might not get a dream that changes your life. You may get a message from a pastor. But you may not get a vision for your life where everything changes because you just had this incredible dream. It doesn't take that. Isaiah was not different. Isaiah was not special. Isaiah just did what God uniquely called him to do. Isaiah didn't have all the answers. Isaiah didn't know what God wanted. Isaiah even questioned his own abilities and his own skills. But you know what Isaiah did have? The correct response. He had the correct position of his heart, which was that of servanthood. We might not get a vision, but we all have a call. It doesn't require all the answers. It doesn't require all of the skills. All it takes is a servant heart. The same heart of Jesus. Jesus, the Son of Man, who came not to be served, but to serve, and to offer his entire life as a ransom for many. The Apostle Paul encouraged the church later on to this end in Romans 12 when he said, "Therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship." Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. Now, I don't know what it was for you or what it is in your life. There's certainly tons, you could name lots and lots and lots of problems in our state, in our town, in our nation, in our world that I did not name. So I don't know what it is that tugs at your heart, but you know what happens. I think some of us, if you're anything like me, you can feel guilty because you feel a tug on your heart and a passion about one issue, and yet you feel like, I really am passionate about this thing, but there's so many other things that I can't possibly get to. You know what I say to that? I say, I think that's amazing. Chase the one. You have been given that passion and that purpose on purpose and for a purpose, and you ought to pursue it. There are enough people in the kingdom of God to pursue all of the world's issues and actually tackle them if we chose to. So it's going to look different for you because you have a different passion, you have a different purpose, you have a different life experience to offer that benefits the world, that's going to let us serve others. Take advantage of that. It is a good thing. It is a good gift from God that you are that way. Author Frederick Buechner offers a quote that, when appropriate, I'll share it every single time because I think it simplifies the Christian life. When I'm wondering, what am I supposed to do about it? Where am I supposed to go? What action am I supposed to take? Here's what Frederick Buechner offers. The place God calls you to is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. The place God calls you to is the place where your deep passion and the world's deep hunger meet. I think you can think about that for 1 minute and find an answer for yourself. The question is, if God is saying, I need someone to be sent to serve, how will we respond? When we can find the intersection of the deep hunger and our deep passion, will we move in that direction? Or will we stay where we are? Because the truth about a calling from God is, God will never call you to something that doesn't involve serving others. God will never call you to something that doesn't involve serving others. Because servanthood is an expression of who God is. So servanthood isn't just an option for a Christian. Servanthood is the option. It is the way of Christ. It is the way of a Christian that we are to live. And I've got good and interesting news for you. Whether you are a lifelong Methodist, or you are new to Methodism, or you don't know what Methodism is, or you are first generation, third generation, doesn't matter. The Methodist Church has a deep, deep, deep history in acts of service and ministries of justice around the world. Let me tell you what I mean, and it goes back a long, long way. The Methodist Church has founded hospitals, colleges, public schools in new areas that didn't have them, orphanages. The Methodist Church has established daycares and job training programs. We played a significant role in the women's suffrage movement. And we carry this legacy on today. There's so much more that you can find out, but I think one of the things I know I've heard within our own community here in Centralia, what's noticeably different about the Methodist DNA is that we serve. But it's not enough for us to rest on our laurels and say, I'm a part of an organization that does something great. God didn't say, I'm calling your church. God says, I am calling you. And if that's a part of what your church is doing, then fabulous. But I am calling you. How will you respond? Isaiah didn't say, here we are, Lord, send us. He says, here I am, Lord. Send me. Because we do carry out this legacy and this heritage of Methodist service and ministries of justice. This summer, we were involved in serving literally thousands of meals to kids who were out of school and couldn't rely on the school program for lunches. We feed our whole community every single month, including the homebound all year long. We provide the necessary school supplies for kids in Centralia, and you know even more that we do for our community and people even around the world. And right now we're preparing to help our community. As the weather is going to start to turn here in the next couple of weeks, we need to be prepared for it to turn so we can help others through our winter coat giveaway Come and donate what you've got. Go through your closet as you're making that switch, bringing those things up. What didn't you wear last year? What didn't you wear this year? Somebody else may be able to take advantage of it, whether it's got a tag or not. Bring it, and we would love to be able to serve our community in that way. There are no limits to this, though. I'm telling you how our church is involved in serving, but there are no limits as to how you individually and us collectively can serve the world around us. There's no limits for how God can use you and for the ways and what you can respond to God's call with. Here I am, Lord, send me. Take your passions and put them to use where people need them. And it won't be easy because sacrifice is not easy. Servanthood is not easy. We put the needs of others ahead of ourselves. That is inherently difficult. But it is always worth it. We will never regret it. Imagine the force for good our church could be if we did this, if we took this attitude that every single one of us said, here I am, Lord, send me, and I'm going to do something different in response to this. Whether I get a vision from God or not, I am different because you have called me, God. And I'm going to say yes. Where my deep passion and the deep need of the world meet, I will say yes. And so throughout the course of this service, or this series, we've been trying to talk about how we can practically apply some of these essential practices. And so when we talked about prayer, we said pray 5 times a day. When you wake up, your meal times, when you go to bed, pray at least 5 times a day. Didn't have to be long. Just pray 5 times a day. When we talked about study, we said read 5 verses a day. If you can read 5 verses a day, we are making progress in terms of how we're studying and how we're engaging with God. At our class, the walk class last Wednesday, we had an impactful exercise where we just read 3. So 5 is just a guideline, but try and read 5 verses a day. And now here when it comes to service, I want us to use our hands and this number 5 to remind us to engage in an act of service 5 times a month. Once a week, find a way that you can serve, big or small, I don't care what it is, but seek it out and then reflect on it for yourself. Where did you find the deepest gladness within that act of service? Who were you serving? Where were you? What was going on? And that's going to clue you in as to where your deep gladness is and where the hunger of the world are as well. Because I think if all of us today saw all of our opportunities to serve, and instead of going on our merry way, said, here I am, Lord, send me, our church would be different, Centralia would be different, the state would be different, the world will be different as a result. Let us respond to the call of God with, here I am, Lord, send me. And kind of as we mentioned a minute ago, one of the ways